there's a sense in which I don't understand this thing that happens so often in organizations, which is that someone will join a pre-existing organization and then they will attempt to take it over or attempt to kick out the founders or attempt to change it to meet their own needs. And the thing I don't understand about it is that if you don't like their organization's direction, why did you join in the first place? And it's really common. We have, in fact, a friend of mine calls it the natural history of environmental organizations. I don't really like that phrase because I don't think it's particularly natural, but it does happen all the time. You have David Brower formed the Sierra Club, and then eventually the Sierra Club kicked him out to because he was too radical, he was too biocentric. And so then he formed Earth Island Institute a few years later, and then he got kicked out of that. And you have right now, Paul Watson and Sea Shepherds are suing each other. Uh, I don't know the details, but basically, Paul Watson, I think, was kind of kicked out of Sea. Paul Watson is Sea Shepherd. He's been Sea Shepherd forever. And the point is not that particular incident, but the point is that again, this happens all the time where people move in. Oh, a great example. My friend John Osborne was the absolute heart and soul of the Spokane, Washington environmental community. And he founded this organization, which was originally called the Inland Empire Public Lands Council. And then it got changed to, I think, the Public Lands Council. Then it got changed to the Lands Council. Doesn't matter. He 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 funded it. He was it. He was the person. And then it got bigger and bigger. And then eventually, one of the mistakes that he made is he had a board that was pretty big, and hostile people took over the board and kicked him out. And now, this organization that at one point helped to shut down timber sales on 6 regional national forests, now helps write timber sales for the Forest Service. And this is, again, this is just, I could just keep going example after example. That's just among environment. Oh, here's another great example is back in the 90s, there was a solid movement in Oregon for zero cut on national forests, zero cut, not just no cutting old growth, but zero cut completely. And there were a lot of grassroots organizations uh, that promoted that. And one of the things that happened is there was this organization up in Washington State that was really good at raising money. And they basically got a bunch of disciples. A bunch, that's too low to the word. They trained a bunch of people to help who had those money connections, and then they would go work. I'm having a hard time not using loaded language. I want to say insinuate. They would go and join an organization, and then they would eventually become board members. And when there was enough of them, they would vote to change the policies until you get these groups that used to vote for that used to go for zero cut now will sign off on logging old growth on public lands. And we've seen this also a million times. Anybody who's ever been a grassroots environmentalist knows that when one of the big nationals comes in, that's great because they've got lots of backing, they've got lots of money, they can help you out. And then what'll often happen is that after a while, with the money comes certain demands that you weaken your stance, you weaken your stance, you weaken your stance until, but by now you've gone from being 3 people who are volunteering all the time to having 6 people on staff. And man, you don't want to lose that, but that comes with those directions. So there's a sense in which, so this happens all the time. And there's a sense in which I've always found it odious and incomprehensible in that if you, if I join an organization and I decide I don't like the direction the organization is going, and this has happened a number of times, um, I just leave the organization. I used to be on the advisory board of Buffalo Field Campaign, and Buffalo Field Campaign has changed its attitudes toward. I don't perceive them anymore as really a voice for the Buffalo, and so I just left. I didn't try to take over Buffalo Field Campaign, and I so I find that really reprehensible and incomprehensible. But but there's a sense in which I do understand it. And the sense in which it is comprehensible is that it's much easier to take over the existing infrastructure and cachet of a group. That if you just start over, if the people who, presuming, I mean, again, I don't, well, we'll take Sierra Club as a better example, that if the people who, they didn't want to start Sierra Club over, they just wanted to change it. And so, of course, they wanted to take the existing infrastructure. A great example of this is that Earth First hasn't been Earth First for decades. But whatever work the sort of walking corpse of Earth First does, um, it's still because of its old name, even though it's long become a shadow. So I understand because there's that cachet. So the question for me really becomes, because this happens so often, how do you prevent it from happening to an organization you care about? And I know that a lot of people worry about this. I talked to two different animal rescue centers that I know and respect and have worked with, and they have both come to me to ask, how do we resolve this? There's one of them, we've talked several times about, she said, as long as I'm alive, I know I can maintain the biocentric focus. But when I die and somebody else takes it over, how am I going to keep in place this biocentric focus? Because that's really what we're talking about here, is that a lot of groups have a strongly biocentric focus, and then that gets dull, that gets worn down over time and pressure. And I asked, several years ago, I was invited to be at a board meeting for Patagonia. And the people associated with that, um, the Chouinards and the Thompsons, are, I think, some of them the most important environmentalists of the last 50 years. And they protected thousands and thousands and thousands of acres, and they've maintained a biocentric attitude. And I asked him, how did you keep from having the organization taken over and become not so biocentric? He says, very easy. We never went public. I maintained it as a private company. I maintained control of it. And as long as I'm alive, that's what it's going to be. And another option that I've seen some organizations do is keep your board very small and make sure that new board members are appointed by the current board members as opposed to elected. I mean, I hate to say it, but don't make your organization a democracy, because if you make it a democracy, it will be much easier for, biocentrism is never very popular, and it is hard to maintain a core of people who are all biocentric without wanting to squander your energy on other issues that are not so central to your mission. This is not unique to environmental organizations at all. You see this sort of grasping everywhere, from elementary school playgrounds up to academia. And it happens all the time in academia, where everybody's like jostling and trying to take over the department or do this. There's this great line by Kissinger about how uh, university politics are so fierce, or so, there's another word he used, university politics are so nasty, uh, precisely because the stakes are so low. And that always kind of cracked me up. And I'm just finishing reading, rereading The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, and it's, we're seeing the same thing at the end. It's where I'm reading right now. The Nazis are basically holding on to Berlin, or part of Berlin. The Russian tanks are 3 blocks from the chancellery, and Hitler's primary lieutenants, Goring, Himmler, and Bormann, are all conniving and fighting among each other as to who gets to take over for Hitler when Hitler dies. And it's like, what are you taking over? You're going to be in charge for 3 days before you get arrested by the Allies or killed by the Allies. And there's this. constant power hungry. It's like a hungry ghost, it's the hungry ghost manifested in people want to take charge, and that's fine. But if you want to take charge of your own organization, make your own organization. Don't just take over somebody else's.